Hello, all my fellow gamers and horror film fans. I'm Mike C. Welcome into the Chrono Cabin. It's that time of year again for sleigh bells, Santa Claus, bowls full of jelly, and Yetis. Yes, Mr. Yeti is extremely excited because he loves this weather. Honestly, it's the cold. He has a lot of fur, so. Billy is busy decorating the Christmas tree, and Billy does an amazing job with the Christmas tree, although he accidentally breaks a lot of the ornaments.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's his hands, you know. So Christmas is right around the corner, and if you want to add some Christmas horror fun to that Christmas cheer, I have some Christmas-themed horror movies that I think you are going to enjoy. We will start with Advent Calendar. This is a French horror film that just released in this December month of 2021. This is a Shudder original, and I have to say, I have actually really been enjoying the Shudder originals. So, this movie is about a young woman who is paralyzed from the waist down, and she's in a particularly dark period in her life. Actually, it's kind of brought on by a lot of the characters around her, because the characters in this movie are really mean to her, like overly mean. But she has one nice friend, and this nice friend brings her an advent calendar to cheer her up. Only problem is, this is no ordinary advent calendar. This advent calendar can make your wishes and your desires come true, but at a terrible cost. And you've got to follow very specific rules. You have to eat the chocolates at specific times, otherwise this advent calendar will kill you. Now, when I first sat down to watch this movie, I was thinking, this might be a little like Wes Craven's Wishmaster, and actually I like that movie a lot. It plays on the idea that you want to be careful what you wish for, and I thought this movie was going to kind of be a little predictable because of that. But this film is not predictable at all. It actually has some nice twists and turns in it, and I really like what the writers did with this. Now, on a creepy factor of 1 to 5, let's say the Chrono Cabin algorithm on this one. Yeah, creepy factor of 2.5. The entity that is in the advent calendar is kind of creepy. It's not the creepiest movie I've seen, but I like the idea. I think the idea is done really well. I think this movie looks great. It's filmed really well. I just think this was a good horror movie, and it was a nice end of 2021 surprise. Now, the next film I want to talk about is The Mothman Prophecies. This movie came out in 2002, and it's hard to believe that as we go into 2022, this movie is going to be 20 years old. Time flies. This film is based on actual events that occurred between November 1966 and December 1967 in the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. In this movie, Richard Gere plays Washington Post columnist John Klein, who through a series of really strange events ends up in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where he basically goes down the rabbit hole into an investigation on the strange sightings of this mysterious Mothman. Now, the character, John Klein, is actually based on the real journalist John Keel, who actually did investigate the strange and bizarre sightings of the Mothman back in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. He actually studied it for years, and he ended up writing a book called The Mothman Prophecies in 1975, and that is what this movie is based on. Now, the events actually took place in 1966 and 1967, but this movie was filmed with the time period of 2002 in mind, so kind of a modern day representation of the events that happened back in 1966 and 1967. And this movie does take place at Christmas. That's why I consider this a Christmas horror film, and that's why I'm mentioning it to you. Now, you might be wondering, what is the Mothman? And that's a very good question, because the Mothman is a very strange phenomenon. And the Mothman is technically just that. It's a giant Mothman-like figure. At least that's how people describe it. Oftentimes they'll say it looks like a giant bird. It has a giant wingspan. It has glowing red eyes. But more importantly, when people see the Mothman or there's a Mothman sighting, it usually coincides with some kind of tragedy or some kind of future tragic event. So the Mothman has kind of become synonymous with a harbinger of doom. This film actually does a great job of explaining the oddness and the strangeness and the dreamlike kind of quality that's behind the Mothman. But I'm going to warn you, this movie is going to leave you with more questions than answers, and I think that's the Mothman. Now, that's probably why this movie got kind of mixed reviews, is because there isn't really an ending that explains exactly what the Mothman is. Just be warned going into that, and no one really understands what the Mothman really is. I mean, that's part of the mystery behind the Mothman. There have been sightings of the Mothman around the world, even in the Middle East and in India, and a lot in the United States, including big cities. And generally after these sightings, bad events have happened, but you might say that bad events happen all the time. The Mothman is indeed a very mysterious figure, and I think that's what makes it kind of creepy. Now, on a scale of 1 to 5 on the creepy factor, what say the Chrono Cabin algorithm? Yeah, I would definitely say a 2.5. It's not the scariest movie around, but it does give you goosebumps at times. Now, it's got a really great cast. It has Richard Gere, it's got Laura Linney, it's got Will Patton. The acting in this movie is great, and this movie was shot very, very well. I particularly love how this movie was shot. So the filmmaking is very good, and I think the storytelling was really good, and it really takes you kind of into this dreamlike world where you feel like you just don't want to go too far. And if you do want to learn more about the Mothman, there's a lot out there. There's a lot of documentaries on the Mothman out there. There's some on Netflix, some on Amazon Prime, and there's also the book. And if you ever end up going to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, you will actually see a statue of the Mothman in the town square. Yes, it's become a tourist attraction. It actually brings a lot of business to the small town of Point Pleasant. And if you watch this movie and go there and then look at the statue, you can explain to your family and friends what the Mothman statue is all about. They'll be very impressed. All right, the next movie is Black Christmas. This came out in 1974. If you have never seen Black Christmas, I highly recommend this. Now, this film has been remade, so make sure that you watch the original. The 1974 film that was directed by Bob Clark. There's also a lot of movies out there with the title Black Christmas, so just make sure you're watching the correct one. The plot is rather simple. A sorority house is having its Christmas party right before their Christmas break, and as they're having this Christmas party, an unseen man enters the house without the sorority sisters knowing it. It actually starts off with some lighthearted comedy, mostly from the house mother. If you can picture an irreverent, alcoholic Mrs. Garrett from The Facts of Life, then I think that would sum up this character. But this film does get very dark. Now, this film is considered a classic horror film by most horror aficionados, and it's considered a classic by a lot of filmmakers as well. This movie is considered to be the movie that sparked the slasher genre. In fact, John Carpenter was influenced by this film when he was making his classic film, Halloween, in 1978. And if you actually watch Black Christmas and then you watch John Carpenter's Halloween, I think you might see some of that influence. It has that first-person perspective point of view from the killer, and it has a very kind of slow-paced but rising tension. Now, I really like the look of this movie. It has that aged film look, of course, because it's from 1974, but it makes the film look kind of grainy. It's got those slightly dulled colors, and there is something about the way old film captures light at night. And I think you'll see it in this movie, especially with all the Christmas lights. It's beautiful to me, and I don't know, maybe if you're a filmmaker out there, you might have a similar opinion. Love to hear it. But this film overall it's really fantastic to watch. It's really kind of a thriller. If I were to teach a class on the history of horror movies, this would most certainly be one of the films that I talk about, along with John Carpenter's Halloween and Wes Craven and a lot of the other great films, and some of the other great films that came out of the 70s. But this movie in particular really kind of created a genre. And it's definitely worth a watch. So if you're a younger horror fan and you've never heard of this movie, you've never seen it, highly recommend that you watch it. Now, on a creepy factor of 1 to 5, what say the Chrono Cabin algorithm? Yeah, definitely a creepy factor of 3. This movie is dark. It's really one of those nail biters, and it really leaves you on the edge of your seat. You can see this movie currently on Shudder. Now, our next film is one that I love to recommend, and surprisingly, I think it kind of falls under the radar a little bit, but this is Krampus. This movie came out in 2015, and it's a Christmas horror comedy. It's about a dysfunctional family that gets together for Christmas, and their fighting is so bad that a young boy actually loses his Christmas spirit. So much so that this little boy accidentally unleashes the Krampus. Now, the Krampus is actually a beast-like character that was created out of Bavarian and Austrian folklore. So this kind of goes back to earlier times when parents wanted to scare the hell out of their kids so that their kids would be good. And the idea was that if kids were bad, the Krampus would come and take them away on Christmas. Now, this seems a little extreme, but a lot of folklore, in its traditional sense, was designed to make sure that kids behave themselves. So bad kids, beware. Now, I'm sure there are better ways to keep your kids in line than terrorizing them with the story of Krampus, but this is how it was done. This movie has a great cast, including Adam Scott, David Koechner, and Allison Tolman, who, in my opinion, basically steals the show. She's great. You might recognize her from the series Fargo, which was a fantastic series. She's a really great actress, and her character is really fun in this. She's funny, and she really takes charge, and you just have to watch her. It's great. Now, on a creepy factor of 1 to 5, what say the Chrono Cabin algorithm on this one? Yeah, this is a 2.5. It's not the scariest movie you'll see, but it has its moments. The Krampus creature is quite creepy. Overall, this is a really fun movie with dark comedic elements. It just looks great, and I think the story is told really well. Now, unfortunately, this movie is a little harder to find. It does jump around on the streaming services, but as of now, it looks like you can rent it on Amazon Prime for $3. I actually bought this movie a number of years back on Amazon Prime, so I actually own it, but I've also seen that it's on IMDb TV where you can watch it with ads, so hopefully you'll find it. It jumps around at times, so just watch for it, and hopefully you'll enjoy it if you watch it. Now, this next movie is kind of an interesting one. I actually like this one. It's called Puka. Puka was released back in 2018, and it's part of the Blumhouse Into the Dark series on Hulu. An out-of-work actor finds an unusual acting job where he's hired to wear a stuffed animal costume designed to help sell Puka, which is a stuffed bear-looking like thing that's both naughty and nice. It's kind of weird. There are moments in this movie where it's visually kind of funny to watch, but overall, I'm going to warn you, this is a pretty dark movie. It doesn't really have a happy ending. I would go so far as to say that this movie is kind of a downer, and don't expect a winter wonderland. This was filmed in Los Angeles. The closest thing to a Christmas vibe are the Christmas decorations, including the Christmas trees, and the fact that this Puka bear is being sold as a Christmas toy. I won't do a creepy factor on this one because it's really not that creepy. It's more just interesting to watch. I was kind of curious to see where they were going to go with it. The acting in this movie is good, it's filmed well, and I think it's really entertaining, so make sure you catch this one on Hulu. The next one is one of my favorites, and it is Rare Exports. This was released back in 2010, and it is a Finnish horror fantasy film. This film takes place in a small isolated village in the Finnish province of Lapland. I often talk about how I like locations in horror movies, how I like certain backdrops in horror movies, and this movie is really great. It's a small, isolated community. It's very wintry. It's very cold. It's just a unique location. It was actually filmed in Norway, and I think Norway is just a beautiful place, and it's a very interesting landscape. So I thoroughly enjoyed the environment, just the location of this movie. I would definitely say if you're looking for a movie to fit this season, this is definitely the movie that's going to do the job. I'm not going to tell you too much about the story because I think you just have to watch it. It's so bizarre and strange, but very unique. It's one of the more unique films I've seen, especially in the horror genre. I will say that this movie touches on an interesting point, and that is the image of Santa Claus. In some European countries, the image of Santa Claus was a little more sinister. It's a lot different from the Santa Claus that we currently know, or the iconic image of Santa Claus that we have come to know. And again, this goes back to folklore. Parents used to tell their kids that Santa would get very angry if kids were bad. And if kids were bad, Santa would literally come and take them away on Christmas Eve. It's kind of that same idea of the Krampus. So in some European countries, the old folklore of Santa Claus and the image of Santa Claus was dark, and it was designed to scare kids into keeping good behavior. Again, I think there's easier ways to keep your kids from doing bad things and terrorizing them, but again, this was kind of the old way, and again, this is where a lot of folklore stems from. So a lot of people don't realize that in 1931, the Coca-Cola company came up with an advertising campaign that involved Santa, and this illustrator drew Santa into what we see as the modern image of Santa now. So a fun fact that the image of Santa has kind of changed over the years, and largely it was due to the Coca-Cola company. So if you want to read more about that, there's plenty of that on the internet, but this movie does kind of go into that territory, and I just find it really interesting. But overall, the movie is fun, it's interesting. Now, I'm not going to do a creepy factor on this movie because I don't really find it so much creepy. It's just weird, but it's interesting weird. So yeah, if you're looking for something a little off the beaten path and it has a Christmassy vibe, I think you will enjoy this movie. You can check it out on Shudder. Now, this next one is not a movie, but a series, and this is a new Danish Netflix series that just released this December month of 2021, and it is called Elves. This is where a family from the city travels to a remote Danish island to have a quiet Christmas. Well, the island has a dark secret, and this dark secret are these dangerous elves that the community has to keep at bay behind an electrical fence. The title of this in Danish actually translates to gnomes. Now, I'm not really sure why they translate it as elves versus gnomes. Perhaps it's just because elves might be easier to market, but the traditional title in this actually does translate to gnomes, and gnomes are kind of a popular decoration that people in Denmark put up around Christmas time. In fact, they put out cookies and milk for these elves so that they won't be mischievous. It's kind of a nice little tradition. This movie really reminds me of Gremlins from 1984. The baby elf in this is adorable, but when they grow up, they become kind of sinister and mean. You'll see what I mean when you watch the series. Again, this is another one where I really like the location of where it's shot. It's shot north of Copenhagen in what they call the Grib Forest. The Grib Forest is very pretty, and it can be also kind of dark and ominous at times because it's a very thick wooded forest. So it's a great location for this movie. It's kind of a small town feel. This kind of got mixed reviews, but I think it's a pretty good series so far. I haven't finished it yet, but the episodes are actually relatively short, so you can get through them reasonably fast. It's not a huge time commitment, but I think this is kind of an interesting little series to top off your Christmas season with. Give it a try. Check it out on Netflix. And speaking of series, I have to mention this one, even though it's kind of on the fringe of horror, but I'm a big fan of Dexter, and Showtime has released a new season of Dexter. It's called Dexter New Blood. It just released before December of 2021, and it's currently going right now, so they do an episode a week, and I am loving it. If you're a Dexter fan, I've got to say you're going to love this. This is a no-brainer. Watch this. It's a big contrast from where it was shot 10 years ago in Miami. This was filmed in upstate New York, and it's in a town called Iron Lake, which is a small community, which is actually presenting a lot of challenges to Dexter, because being a serial killer in a small town where everyone knows your name or knows what brand of coffee you're drinking, or if you switch that brand of coffee, they will know about it. It makes things a little difficult. But this series is really getting into the nuts and bolts of what Dexter was 10 years ago, and I'm highly enjoying it. I really recommend you watch it. The characters are great, and overall the action is really, really good. And depending on when you're watching this video, if you start watching it, you're going to have a good handful of episodes to watch. I think it's currently up to episode 6. At least that's what I'm on right now. And I will tell you that this season is reminding me a little bit of the John Lithgow season, which was my favorite Dexter season from 10 years ago. Now, I will end this video with just a couple outlier movies in case you want just something extra to watch. One of those is Jack Frost, which was made back in 1997. Now be careful, there's multiple movies called Jack Frost, one of them being a family film from 1987, I think, that stars Michael Keaton. No, look for this artwork, and you can actually see this on Shudder. They actually have a number of installments. So they have Jack Frost Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and I'm not sure if they came out with a Part 4. Now I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't seen this movie in years, but I remember when I saw it a long time ago, it made me laugh. It was very interesting, to say the least. It has to do with a serial killer that is in prison, and he's taken away on a bus to go to his execution. But on the way to his execution, they run into a genetics truck. And there's a big accident, and out comes a serial killer / snowman. So enjoy it. You can thank me later. Now, the last one I'll mention is Silent Night, Deadly Night, and this one has a Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. I think they even went to Part 4. You can watch this one on Shudder. Again, this is another one that I haven't seen in years. I remember it being entertaining, but I'm not sure if it holds up. Probably doesn't. Both of these movies that I'm mentioning are what we call B horror movies. And funny enough, this is a term that I don't think really exists much anymore. At least I don't hear people say B horror movie or use that term. I think it's just kind of a dated term because it used to refer to horror movies that had low budgets that basically went straight to video. And since we don't have video stores anymore, I think the name itself just kind of disappeared. So now it's like a B horror streaming movie, or these movies are B horror streaming movies, whatever you want to call them. But again, they aren't great films per se, but they are entertaining, so maybe give them a shot if you want. Anyway, everyone, that about does it for me here at the Chrono Cabin. And if you are celebrating Christmas, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas. If you are celebrating the holidays, I wish you a happy holidays, and most of all, a happy new year and a safe new year. Got a lot of interesting stuff coming up in 2022, specifically in horror movies and in video games, so I'm looking forward to talking about all that. I actually did start this channel earlier this year in 2021, and I am looking forward to another year with all of you talking about all of these fun movies and video games. So thank you to all of you who have started to watch my channel, and I'm hoping that it grows. And as always, keep playing those video games, keep watching those horror movies, and I will see you soon.